Thank you very much for having me here. It's a real joy and pleasure. The city is beautiful, and the intellectual conversations we've been having, I think I'm already finding very rewarding. So today, I'm going to talk about decision-making in times of transformative change, and what we're going to do is a little bit of philosophy together. So the talk that I'm going to present is a little bit different from what you heard from Professor Bogosian. So imagine that you had a one-time only chance to become a vampire. With one swift, painless bite, thank you, you'll be permanently transformed into an elegant and fabulous creature of the night. As a member of the undead, your life will be completely different. You'll experience a range of intense new sense experiences. You'll gain immortal strength, speed, and power. And you'll look fantastic in black. Now, there are negatives. You'll have to drink blood, maybe human blood or maybe artificially constructed blood, but you'll find it delicious, right? You'll have to avoid sunlight, and you'll have to sleep in a coffin. Now, suppose that all of your friends, people whose interests, views, and lives are similar to yours, have already decided to become vampires. And most of them tell you that they love it. They describe their new lives with unbridled enthusiasm and encourage you to become a vampire too. They say things like, look, life has meaning and a sense of purpose now that it never had when I was human. And they'll kind of go on enthusiastically and tell you about how wonderful it is. However, when you press them for more information, right, they'll say, well, I can't really explain it to you. You're just a human. You have to become a vampire to understand what it's like. And the question is, right, would you do it? And the problem is, how could you possibly make an informed choice? Because after all, you can't know what it's like to become a vampire until you become one. The experience, as I describe it, is transformative. That is, it's an experience that's both radically new, such that you have to have it to know what it will be like for you, and moreover, it's going to change you fundamentally. You can't hear me. Shall we turn it up? Do we want to turn it a little bit more? Does this help? I'll speak closer. This is very loud up here. All right. So we're contemplating the choice to become a vampire, which is a transformative experience. And it's transformative because it's radically new, and you can't know what it's going to be like until you actually go through it. And moreover, it's going to change you. It's going to change you deeply and fundamentally. And the question is, if you have the chance to have a transformative experience, like becoming a vampire, would you do it? And how could you possibly know what you need to know in order to make the choice rationally? Okay, so this is a fictional case. But there are real-life cases of transformative experiences. Real-life transformative experiences are life-changing experiences that shape who you are and what you care about. Going to war, having a baby, moving to another country, starting college, right? Starting university, being spiritually reborn, or maybe having a radical political conversion. What I'm going to do today is talk about transformative experiences like this and show how exploring the structure of knowledge and understanding, the epistemic structure involved, can help us understand the way that new and unstable change can form us and how we should respond to this when we're making big and small life choices, both individually and collectively. Okay, so let me go through with a little bit more detail what I'm talking about with respect to transformative experience. The first basic idea of this larger concept is that experience teaches us things that we couldn't know otherwise. And I'll use an example. So consider the durian fruit. I'd wager that many of you have not tried durian, okay? It's a Southeast Asian fruit. It's known to have a foul smell and a distinctive flavor. Now, before I'd ever tasted a durian, I didn't know what it was like to taste it. I'm just going to wing it when the pictures go in and out. So just focus on me, I guess, if you can't look at the durian. Okay, so the interesting thing about a durian is that it's incredibly foul-smelling, but some people are passionate about its flavor. It's supposed to have a very distinctive and delicious flavor if you can get past the repulsive smell. Right? One chef describes it in the following way. He says, its taste can only be described as indescribable, something you either love or despise. And then afterwards, your breath will smell as if you've been French kissing a dead rat. So until you taste a durian, there's something that you can't know. You can't know what it's like to taste durian. And so you don't know, actually, how much you like it and what its flavor's like. Now, the point here is that to know what it's like to taste a durian, right, requires experience. It requires actually tasting it. Now, the durian example I just gave you is related to a famous thought experiment in philosophy involving a woman named Mary who grows up in a black and white room. Mary has never seen color. Now, she has lots of friends who can tell her about what it's like to see color. But the question is, and maybe she knows all of the latest kind of brain and vision science, the question is, can Mary know what it's like to see red before she leaves her black and white room? And I, and many other people, would argue that no, she cannot. For Mary to know what it's like to see red, she actually has to leave her black and white room and go out and see red, to see a ripe tomato or a red apple. Now, the idea here is that for some kinds of experiences, right, you have to have them. You actually have to have them in order to know what they're like. There's no substitute for experience. Like seeing red for the first time or tasting something new that's very different from what you've had before. You have to have that kind of experience to know what it's like. So trying a durian for the first time or seeing red for the first time is this kind of experience. It's, as I'll describe it, an epistemically transformative experience. It expands and changes what you can know and increases your ability then to think about new things. It carries a distinctive kind of information. Now, this matters, okay? It can matter in a lot of contexts. And in what I'm interested in here, it can matter for rational decision-making. Because if a decision crucially involves a kind of experience you haven't had before, then you might lack certain kinds of information that you need in order to make a rational decision involving it. So let's look at a toy case to see how this would work. Imagine that you're in Thailand and you're trying to decide what to have for breakfast. And your choice is between durian and pineapple. So we've got durian, we've got pineapple, right? Now, let's say that you know what pineapple tastes like and you like pineapple, but you've never tried a durian. And the question is, right, if you want to decide on what to have for breakfast based on what you're going to like most, which flavor do you prefer, then you're at a certain kind of loss when you're choosing between durian and pineapple. In other words, you can think about how much you like pineapple and choose pineapple because you like its taste, but you can't think about how much you like durian and choose the taste that you prefer. There's a certain sense in which the way that you would assign value to each of these tastes is undefined. You can say, well, pineapple's pretty fantastic. I give it an X value, but what's the value of having a durian? I don't know what it tastes like. Maybe it'll be great, or maybe it'll be terrible. Okay, now there are other ways to choose, obviously. You could choose just to find out what it's like, but that's not the case that we're looking at here. We're looking at a case where ordinarily, when we think about making decisions, we look at our different options, assess their value, and choose the option that we prefer. We want to maximize our expected value. That's what rationality involves. And the trouble is, if you can't calculate the expected value of an action, then your decision problem goes undefined. Your model fails in an important way. Now, the same kind of issue comes up in the Mary case that we discussed before. Think about it this way. If Mary doesn't know what it's like to see red, she can't use that information to decide whether it's worth it for her to leave the safety of her black and white room to discover the nature of color. If she doesn't know what it's like to see red, she doesn't know what value she should assign to the experience of leaving her room when she's deciding whether she prefers to stay or whether she prefers to go. Let's say it's an irreversible choice. She either stays there forever or she leaves. And the problem is that here, just like with our breakfast decision, the choice of whether to leave her room is incomplete. Her model goes undefined at a crucial point. And this illustrates the second idea that I wanted to point out, namely, the fact that experience can be necessary for knowing has implications for contexts in which this knowledge is important. Now, I illustrated this with the small stakes Durian case and the pretend case of Mary in her black and white room, but the same point extends to real-life decisions. So what I'm trying to do here is we go through thought experiments to see the structure, and then we think about more real-life cases where the same ideas apply. So imagine you're making an important life choice for someone else. If you're making an important life choice for someone else, it can be absolutely essential to understand what their life is like. For example, what if you have to make a choice for your autistic son? Parents of autistic children need to understand what it's like for their child to be in various situations in order to care for them, to teach them, and to help them. In other words, they need to understand what it's like to have sensory overload, because autistic people respond to sensory information in different ways from how people who are not on the spectrum respond. Unfortunately, in many cases, simply telling parents about how their child experiences certain events just isn't enough. Describing to parents how an autistic child would respond to an environment isn't enough to tell them and teach them about what sensory overload is like or why the child would experience it. Well, why not, right? Well, think about your own situation. Imagine trying to explain what it's like to see red to someone like Mary who's never seen color. Description and testimony simply can't do the job. It's just a psychological fact about the way that our brains work, that language carries one kind of information and experience can carry a different kind of information. Actually having the immersive first-person experience of seeing color or sensory overload in a certain context carries a kind of information that you can't capture with mere description. So this gives us another reason to be interested in these ideas, because there are lots of cases where we find ourselves in this sort of situation. I think this is working here. So in particular, we can think about new technology. New technology, by giving us new kinds of experiences, can change our lives and bring new kinds of information to us. Consider the invention of the electric light bulb, or this created a new kind of lived experience, or creating the automobile, or the creation of the internet. New kinds of technologies create new kinds of experiences and new ways of living, right? So think about another example, virtual reality, one of my favorite cases. A reason why virtual technology is so important and is increasingly powerful is because it exploits the essential information-carrying power of immersive experience. And as we know from the examples we've been thinking about, truly new experiences bring truly new kinds of information. Now, actually recognizing the importance of VR, right, meant that the UK National Autistic Society created a virtual simulation of what it's like to have sensory overload as a child in order to teach people in a new way how to understand what it's like to be autistic. And in fact, this VR simulation has had a significant impact. Parents of autistic children found it especially valuable. One mother who was interviewed after having the VR experience, describes that how before she had the experience, she thought she knew everything there was to know. But afterwards, she had a much richer and deeper and important understanding, basically, of how her child would respond to various environments. Now, understanding the distinctive psychological contribution made by first-person experience, I think, is interesting for a number of reasons. Again, it relates to the way that truly new technologies can create truly new kinds of experience. Here's another concept that's important in Silicon Valley. It's called the user experience. Think about it this way. What's the difference between the user experience of using some particular machine or technology, where it's just kind of cool and interesting, and a user experience that's truly transformative? This is actually quite an important distinction for technologists. Just as we discover new kinds of experience when we have genuinely new tastes or see color for the first time, a user experience that's a truly new kind of experience is not just cool and awesome, it's epistemically transformative. That is, having the user experience creates new abilities and new possibilities for you. Once we understand this conceptual structure, you can see how creating something that's actually epistemically transformative is the distinctive feature of truly disruptive events and truly disruptive technology. For example, remember back in the days, some of you anyway, before there were smartphones, right? Maybe some of you can't remember that, but I'll tell you about it a little bit. So I remember, before there were smartphones, the sense of immense excitement and promise just before the original unveiling. But I also recall a sense of puzzlement. What was this weird new thing going to be? How could a new kind of phone, right, change anything that was important? But obviously, as we all know now, this new kind of phone changed everything. It changed the way that we live our lives in so many ways, and we underwent an epistemic revelation or revolution. And in other words, like, there weren't things like apps before the iPhone. You couldn't check your email or send text messages in the way that we can now before an iPhone. You could use a little SMS phone, and that was about it. And even then, before that existed, you had to actually call someone to talk to them. Now, using then the iPhone gave us a distinctive new kind of user experience and created this epistemic transformation in the user. And moreover, this transformative shift brought about large-scale changes in lived experience. In the case of the iPhone, basically, when this new type of smartphone became available, right, we all changed. The transformative epistemic shift that we underwent, which happened to individuals one by one, also happened collectively to people as a whole, right? It redounded back and changed the way that we interacted and changed the way that we live our lives. And as such, it brought a full-on collective transformative experience. And what this brings out is how these epistemic changes can scale up into deep and systematic personal changes. So let me define this just a little bit more precisely. An experience can be life-defining when it's personally transformative. That is, having it dramatically affects or changes something important about your life, something deep that you care about. Now, not all epistemically transformative experiences are life-changing in this way, right? Just discovering what durian tastes like probably won't change who you are in a deep and systematic way. The iPhone, on the other hand, may have actually been transformative in this way. It may have actually been both epistemically and personally transformative. And these are the interesting cases of transformative experience. That is, experiences of epistemic transformation that scale up somehow into personal transformation. And the possibility of creating and understanding this kind of transformative change has, I think, deep philosophical implications. To see them clearly, go back to that high-stakes, life-defining choice of whether or not to become a vampire. We can see how the vampire case involves a kind of high-stakes transformation. And importantly, right, becoming a vampire is a radically new kind of experience, but it also changes who you are. And the structure that we find in the case of vampire transformation is present in a number of real-life personal choices. For example, you might receive a job offer in another country out of the blue. You might meet the love of your life and have to choose whether to stay with them or to go with them or stay in the marriage that you're in. You might win the lottery. You might get pregnant for the first time. You might experience the death of a loved one. These experiences will be epistemically transformative. But also, the changes will bring a new life for you, a new way of living. And as such, they can scale up to being personally transformative. Now, this kind of transformation can be exciting. It can give you a chance to start over, a chance to make something new for yourself, to discover a new way of living. But it can also be frightening, or it could be negative. Change brings risk. Obviously, death brings pain. Having a baby, for example, will change what you care about and how you'll live for the rest of your life. Moving to a different country means leaving your home and everything familiar behind. Embracing your new love means betraying your partner and destroying your marriage. Whether you're ready for it or not, having the opportunity to start a new life opens up a whole new world of possibilities, possibilities where you could succeed, but also possibilities where you could fail and fail drastically. Now, a key element here involves the way the future holds immense promise, but is also deeply unknown. The future involves an epistemically transformative shift that brings a seismic personal shift, an experience that will change you fundamentally and deeply. And the experience has that power because of the new information it carries. To give you another intuitive example of how this could be, imagine a congenitally blind adult who is about to have retina surgery to become sighted. Think about his epistemic situation the night before the operation. He knows that in the future, the nature of his lived experience will be deeply and fundamentally different. And while he's probably heard plenty of discussion about what it's like to be sighted, about what it's like to watch movies and see sunsets, cross a busy street unaided, right? In some deep and fundamental sense, he doesn't know what it's like to live life this way as someone with ordinary vision. More generally, if he's about to have an operation to gain vision, the nature and structure of his life is about to change dramatically. The night before the operation, he knows it will change, but in a very deep sense, he doesn't know how it will change. The first-person problem for the blind man is that there's an epistemic wall created by the transformative nature of the experience involved in the choice. And this wall blocks him from understanding from the inside who he'll become after the operation. In this situation, he cannot imaginatively project himself forward to know mentally what it's going to be like on the other side when he has sight. And the way we can put this is the blind man cannot prospectively assess his future first-personal point of view. He can't imaginatively capture or simulate the nature of his future lived experience, what it will be like to live as a sighted person. Now, if he's sure that the change in his visual capacities will be a good one, then there's a sense in which the future also holds immense promise and excitement. We can think of it this way. The future holds a kind of epistemic revelation. When we're sure that future changes are good ones that we want to have now, facing a transformative experience can be more exciting than it can seem risky. But what about when we face life-defining events where we can't know that the future we might have is the one that we want? What if we're ambivalent or afraid of what the future might bring? Going back to the vampire example, what if you had a one-time only chance to become a vampire, but you don't know whether it's going to be a good choice or a bad choice? How could you make that decision, right? How could you possibly make an informed choice? For after all, you can't know what it's like to become a vampire until you actually become one. It's an experience that's both radically new, such that you have to have it to know what it will be like for you, and moreover, it will change your core personal preferences, your very being. You can't possibly know what it would be like before you try it, and you can't possibly know what you'd be missing if you don't. When you find yourself, when you're confronted with this kind of choice, like the choice of whether to become a vampire, because it's a radically new experience, like the blind man gaining sight, you can't prospectively see what the experience will bring. And the problem with this, of course, is that if you're supposed to make a rational decision, partially through imagining what your future options are, right, to decide whether or not you want to bring that about, you're stuck, right, because you don't know what it's like to become a vampire, so you can't use this in your decision of whether or not to become one. And moreover, this is a high-stakes, irreversible decision. It's not just something easy that you can go back on. Now, remember that I said everyone, or just about everyone you talked to, told you that actually becoming a vampire was fabulous, right? Maybe this is a good reason to do it. Everyone else is doing it, and everyone else says it's fantastic. But I think there's a complication in here that we have to attend to. And the complication is this. Should you really rely on vampire testimony? Right? Maybe, especially when there are some people that seemed quite anti-vampire beforehand and now are suddenly like enthralled with the possibility, maybe there's something deep that happens when you become a vampire, something where you get biologically rewired such that you love being a vampire simply because you've become one. You might suspect that it's something about the experience of becoming a vampire that makes you want to be one. Now, and maybe there are even good evolutionary reasons for this, right? Like it's quite helpful if people are glad to be vampires once they become them, because if they're not, well, then they'd be putting stakes through their own hearts or something, that's not advantageous in any way for vampires. This question about whether an experience that you choose, an action that you perform, could change the very agent that you are, formally involves what's called act-state dependence. Let's see if we can. In other words, there's a way in which there's a kind of endogeneity that's possible with respect to this change. And this is important, because if the experience changes who you are in virtue of having the experience, then it undermines the evidential value of the testimony of vampire friends and family members, right? There's a way in which their testimony is dependent on the fact that they underwent the change. So, if you're ambivalent about whether to become a vampire, you are still in a difficult position, because you have to decide whether you should choose in accordance with who you are as a human, or if you should choose in accordance with what you'd care about after the choice as a vampire. And there could be a fundamental conflict here. In high-stakes, life-changing cases, especially real-life versions of this can turn into a very tricky and very risky problem. Because what happens is the new experience changes who you are, and as such, changes what you prefer. Okay, I'm talking about being a vampire. It's really nice to be doing it in this environment. It just seems apt, okay? But let's think about a real-life case. One of my favorite real-life cases involves the choice to become a parent. I think the very same kinds of questions about life-changing choices and transformative experience arises for anyone who's trying to decide whether or not they want to become a parent, especially if they're ambivalent about the situation, right? Then they will face the issues that arise with respect to transformative experiences, how a life-changing choice can change who you are in a very fundamental way. At least in an ordinary case, if you're a woman who physically produces a child, you go through a distinctive and unique experience when you grow, carry, and give birth to a baby. And in the process, you form a very particular and distinctive kind of attachment to that child. And the way that you experience this relationship with your child, that is, the way you experience standing in the distinctive parent-child attachment relation, will itself be epistemically and personally transformative. As such, it has the very same structure as the vampire case, and the very same sorts of questions arise. Those who are about to become parents for the first time often have a sense of the impending magnitude of the change, right? They know they're about to experience something massive and amazing, But in an important sense, they also know that they have no idea what's coming down the pike. And anyone who's already a parent knows that normally, once you have your child, you form an attachment to that very child, such that you very deeply prefer to have that very child. That is, even if you were ambivalent beforehand, or even if, say, you might have wanted to wait another 6 months and then to have a child and would become a parent to a different child, now that you actually have the child that you have, you can imagine having no other in its place. That is, the transformative process of becoming this child's parent reorganized your preferences so that you're now very deeply glad to become the parent of this very child. And notice then that we can see this structure in lots of other places as well. Those of us that have smartphones have almost certainly become attached to their phones in a way that makes life without one almost unimaginable. Moreover, although there are clearly negatives attached, I dare say most of us would not elect to return to the time before smartphones existed. Too much has changed, and we're no longer a society that can live without the connection that such phones provide. Even if we wanted to return to the past, it's often not possible. Consider the blind man who becomes sighted. The transition to ordinary vision is often difficult and unpleasant. Many of those who make the transition are in the end not clearly happy with their new choice. Yet once the transition occurs, it may not be possible nor desirable to return to one's old life. Too much has changed. Now, the examples I've been giving have been largely locally transformative, and these are ones that are largely under our control. But increasingly, we face a world that contains disruptive transformative events that are not under our control. The ongoing global pandemic, imminent climate change, war, political unrest brought about by social change and increasing inequality, as well as changes in political behavior, and looming behind all of this, the very real possibility of creating a transformative artificial intelligence that could escape any constraints that we, with our paltry human minds, could devise. What understanding the framework of transformative change at the local level can teach us is how to approach these global, deeply disruptive transformative events. The first lesson is to recognize that we constantly underestimate the power and disruption of a transformative event, and we underestimate it in a very deep and pervasive way. Unfortunately, this is tied to basic facts about human psychology. For basic reasons, we cannot know what new kinds of events will be like until we actually experience them. Recall the lessons that we learned back in the spring of 2020 with the global pandemic. Like gaining vision for the first time, we have to be in the event sometimes to understand it. And this means that for the next new kind of event, yet again, we will surely fail to anticipate what we're in for. In other words, it's a condition of transformative events that we face them in a certain state of ignorance. It's simply definitional that they're unknown. And so we cannot preemptively assess what to expect at a fundamental level on relevant dimensions. We can't forget about the epistemic wall. The second lesson is that the disruptive event disrupts ourselves, not just the world. Okay, as I said, we face a situation of act-state dependence. When the event occurs, the world changes, but we also change. What we want and care about changes as a response to the event. Putting this together, when we face transformative events, we cannot anticipate many essential features of what we are about to experience. And moreover, we can't anticipate what we're going to care about and how we prefer to act in virtue of undergoing this change in response to this new kind of experience. This creates a deep instability. And we face this deep instability because we have to act, we have to try to act while the world shifts beneath our feet. And if we try to preemptively plan in a rigid, inflexible way, many of our plans will be designed in the wrong way. They'll be designed for the world before it was transformed, not as it's being transformed. How then should we respond? How are we to decide and act rationally? We cannot prepare as though we know what's going to happen. We can't rely on the facts to stay the same. Radically new technologies, fearsome new diseases, dramatic weather events, and new challenges of unknown types, unknown unknowns, will continue to arise. This means that we need to combine a position of epistemic humility, that is, a willingness to know that we don't know what to expect, with rules that we can follow in unstable times. Such rules cannot be based on facts that are changing. Rather, we need to follow rules that can be based on unchanging, deeply stable features of reality. What are these features? I see at least three. The first one is logic. The mathematical and logical structure of the universe is constant. We can rely on inference on the logical structure of deduction and induction. The second one is probability and data. Scientific methods, broadly understood, involving the collection and assessment of data, and the rules of probability as applied to that, capture the nature of the unchanging real world. And the final piece is morality. What is morally good must be identified and preserved and cleaved to. None of these features are up for grabs. They're all bedrock features of the structure of reality. We need to use these features, then, to define a decision heuristic, a rule to follow even when all other rules are changing, a rule to provide a tiny oasis of stability amongst a desert of transformative change. And I would add, in addition to this, that we need to approach the massive instability that we face with a sense of playfulness and optimism. Okay? Think about the vampires. Rather than be conservative and fear change and lock ourselves down and hold on to the world that was, what we need to do is be open, right, and recognize that change is coming, okay, not to minimize the possibility of negative consequences, but there surely will be negative consequences, but rather to understand that there's a possibility here. And what we have control over is how we respond to the possibilities. We need to be flexible and agile and open rather than respond with fear and resistance. And remember, like the case of becoming a parent or a vampire, the events that we will experience will reform us so that who we become, both individually and collectively, afterwards will not be who we are now as we face the event. And this, then, at least, is a first step towards how to make decisions in times of transformative change. Thank you.
Excuse me, would you like to sit down for the questions first?
Oh, no, that's okay. Thank you. Yes.
We have time for questions. Thank you very much, Professor Paul. All right, we've got a gentleman in the beige blazer. Do we have a mic on?
Thank you. So I guess, let me just apologize in advance for a loaded question, because there's a lot of philosophical implications to your entire model, and I would love to spend time with you afterwards, because there really is a lot to go through. But I would like to focus on your philosophy of choice, because that is something that absolutely shook me to my core. And your model, where you're basically saying that we assign value to the two choices or more choices that we have. And then if one of them is something that can potentially become a epistemically transformative experience, then what you're saying is that we're stuck. We cannot make an informed decision. I guess what my question would be, aren't you afraid that when it comes to all the existentialists or phenomenologists in the room, that is an absolutely outrageous statement to make, when basically, in their philosophy, it is their thrownness into the universe and every moment of their existence that determines their freedom, and basically their freedom is based on the fact that they make choices every second and every moment of their day. When in their philosophy, that is what makes them free. What you're saying, that is what makes them unfree. That is what gets them stuck. And to come back to one of your examples, you even said that the whole tangent about vampires can be, the comparison can be drawn even to transformative experiences such as going to war. Well, I mean, concretely in Sartre's philosophy, when there was this decision whether to go to war or to stay with their family and care for them, that is a question that one student posed to Sartre. He said that there is basically no right answer, and it is the free choice that he makes that really makes them free. Now, since that is opposite to what you're saying, I guess my question would be, can it ever be merged? Can the existentialists ever approach your philosophy of choice in a constructive way and perhaps find a common ground?
So far be it for me to worry about making an outrageous statement, like that's part of my job, really. But here's a way to frame what I'm saying. What I'm doing is attacking a certain kind of decision theory, a certain kind of picture of rational decision-making that I find too conservative, where the thought is that we know enough, that we make rational decisions in context, basically implicitly, only when we know the nature and value of our future options. I think this is an outmoded model and it needs to be replaced. But what I'm saying is actually not inconsistent with people who value kind of existentialist choice and phenomenology. Because what I also propose, and I propose in my book and some of my subsequent work, is to replace that outmoded model with a different model. And one part of that new model involves valuing the role of revelation and discovery. And at the very end, when I was saying we need to approach things in a spirit of kind of flexibility, playfulness, and openness, part of that would be valuing the nature of the experience for the sake of it, even if it's negative, and understanding that what we do is construct ourselves continuously through these transformative events. So there's a way in which I'm quite receptive to the phenomenologist. It's just that I, as an analytic philosopher, and as someone who does computational cognitive science along with philosophy, I like to bring mathematics and decision theory and cognitive science to bear on this question and in support of the larger picture.
We've got another question from Professor Ray.
Thank you, Laurie. It was a great talk. I was wondering what's the impact of society, the environment, on decision-making. I guess there are major limits there, not? For example, I guess that when you're in China, I mean, nowadays they benefit, but they had the one-child policy, for example, to refer to your example. Also, like information is limited in China, and maybe that's going to happen in the West as well at some point, based on all the wrong information that is now being spread. So your choice in decision-making is not really free, is it?
I think, do you mean for individuals or for, so one problem we have is we have limited information, right? And we're always going to have limited information. And you can see what I'm reacting to. There's a simple sense in which ordinary decision-making, at least on a standard model, assumes that we have we have complete information, it assumes stability and completeness, and we just simply don't have that. And I think it is true that the model that I'm describing is a very kind of Western conception of freedom where we have choices and we can control our lives in some ways. But I think in other societies, there are certain levels of control that people have and people can make choices, even if they're not as fundamentally free as the options that we have. And again, what I would say is we need to reconfigure the model, right? Recognize what we don't know, recognize what we do know, and then just be open to basically to a responsive sort of reconstruction of ourselves. Yeah.
We got a question from the lady in the front row.
Question. Where did we come with our moral values? What's their priorities? How durable are they? and what can we expect in the future in their modification or change. So, and does it include Europeans and North Americans, and does it include the whole humanity?
So if I understand your question, look, it's very easy to say that we have to, that morality is like a fundamental fixed part of the universe. But the real question is, what are the right moral values, and how do we determine them? And I don't have an answer for that. My best hope would be that we have a kind of collective approach to this, and that this is, I think, a fundamental challenge to try to identify what the right moral values are, both at a societal level and at a global level. If we can't do that, then I think we face additional problems. So that's my hope, that we sort of identify this as a target for the future decision making.
Thank you. We've got a further question here. I'm going to hand over the microphone.
Thank you. So may I ask you, you talked about a universal decision framework that stems from the 3 basic properties of reality. And you said that it could be used to determine kind of when you have these decisions about transformative change. So I would like to ask you, what is it? Thank you.
What I argued was that we need to construct decision models that are flexible and that recognize basically that there are unknowns. So for an example, here's a simple example using a heuristic. Let's say I'm playing a game of chess and I'm not a chess master, and so I don't have like a map of which moves to make, that iterates all the way out through the decision tree, or even 10 moves ahead. Instead of that, I might play using a heuristic like, well, don't trade a queen for a pawn. Okay? So that's a rule that will help me get through the game. I may not win, but I'll do better if I use that rule than if I don't. And so the thought is that when we're facing things like climate change or kind of radical political upheaval, or, I don't know, the next new kind of whatever event it's going to be, maybe it won't be a pandemic, it's going to be something else, that we use heuristics based on mathematics and data collection, probabilistic analysis, and morality. And we hold to those when we're making decisions, because everything else in a certain way is up for grabs. That's the idea.
Thank you.
All right, we've got time for one more question before the break, if there is one. Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you. For me, it was quite obvious that from the form of a procedure, you actually brought up a lot of new ideas on how to look into problems and epistemology in general, like how to think about them. When you look, and of course, when we look at issues, understanding that we do not understand them, in fact, is important. How does this? Do you think there is a general application that maybe could be applied to our society, or maybe a specific example in which you could demonstrate how we then might think about the decision differently? Because you provided examples which show that even transformative change can be a change for the better or for the worse. So do you think there is a general implication as if be open to transformative changes, even though a lot of them can be damaging? Or what is your stance in the practical?
Yes, I think transformative changes can be damaging. So here's a personal example that that could be controversial. So take the choice, say someone is ambivalent about having a child. This is one of my favorite cases. And then they have the child, and having the child changes the way that what they care about. It changes who they care about. They care about their child in effect, more than they care about themselves. And let's say they had a thriving career before they had their child, but then the changes, and their child also, let's say, makes their life in some ways very, very difficult. They can still be deeply glad that they had that child, even while recognizing that they've lost their career and that they're suffering in a kind of distinctive way, and find meaning throughout that. Okay, so this is an example of a kind of transformative change that brings both positive and negative consequences. The positive consequences come in part from the way that that person has changed what they care about in response to the experience. And I think the same thing can happen, like with the pandemic. There were many negative things about the pandemic, but also I think we learned in important ways how to kind of connect with immediate others. We've learned how important actually social interaction is, and I think there are a bunch of other things that in an important sense we've changed as a society, bringing many negative things, but also what we care about has changed. And so what I'm saying is, like, it's just a fact of life that we face these changes, and having a naive picture of how to approach them isn't going to work for us, so that we have to have what I take as a more sophisticated picture of recognizing the unknowns and then recognizing how we reform ourselves as we experience them. And that's basically, you know, how to manage it as best we can.
Okay, once again, I would like to thank Professor Paul for that wonderful talk.